Okay. Hey guys. Can you tell that I've gotten some sun this weekend? I got a sunburn. Wasn't a good idea. Should have worn my sunscreen. So, chapter 7 of Tucker's Countryside. I'm doing this from my phone this time instead of the iPad, so my arm may get tired. I may have to switch arms. We may have to try a different way to prop it up or something. I don't know. So I still miss you guys. I can see that 10 of you have watched the first video. And a few of you have requested that I go ahead and post this next one. So chapter 7, Tucker's Countryside. And the chapter is indoors. All right. And so, after having spent almost all his first week in Connecticut in Chester's Stump, trapped by the flood, Tucker Mouse spent almost all his second week in a robin's nest, waiting for the waters to subside. It wasn't altogether unpleasant, however. The three young robins proved to be a very enthusiastic audience. Tucker told them stories in his life in New York, how he sometimes rode the shuttle from Times Square to Grand Central Station just for the fun of it, and how exciting it was to scrounge for the small change that the human beings lost, especially during rush hour. The three youngsters were so thrilled that one morning they announced to their mother, Dorothy Robin, that when they grew up they were going to New York and live in the Times Square subway station. Dorothy was a sensible robin and a very good mother too, so she didn't tell them that they could not go to New York. What would your parents say if you said you were moving to New York to live in the Times Square subway station? Would they like that idea? Probably not. She just kept feeding them the worms that she plucked up from the lawns of the houses across the street and told them she thought it would be best if they waited until they were grown up before they decided where they wanted to live. Chester and Tucker didn't have to eat worms to survive. John Robin brought them nuts and seeds, and by the time their stay in the willow was over, Tucker had actually gotten to like them, although he still missed the human food he was used to. For diversion, he also learned to climb around on the branches of the willow tree. Who would have thought it, he said to himself, an underground mouse like me, and now I'm a champion tree climber and swimmer. The flood gradually receded, and a day came at last when dry land appeared in the meadow. Chester and Tucker thanked the robins for their hospitality, promised to come back for a visit very soon, and scrambled down branch by branch to the earth beneath the willow tree. Doesn't it feel wonderful to be on solid ground again, said Chester? Because remember what happened in the last chapter with the flood? So I'd say they both were a little scared from that. And so Tucker is really happy to be back on regular solid ground now after all the wetness. I'll say, Tucker answered. The first thing they did was examine Chester's stump, which still was dampish, but drying out nicely. And the second was, Harry Cat, said Tucker. Let's go. And remember, they went to see Harry Cat in the last chapter and they couldn't find him. And that's when all the rain started. They found him waiting for them at the sun porch door. I knew you'd be coming over, said Harry. I've been watching the flood from Mrs. Hadley's bedroom window, and I saw you could make it today. And here's a picture of the robins and Tucker Mouse telling his stories. Okay. Sniffed Tucker. From a safe bedroom window, he watches the scene of our peril. Is there anything to eat? Yes, said Harry. I saved something for you. He unlatched the door. Come on in, it's safe. Mrs. Hadley and Ellen have gone over to Jasper's house for lunch. Who's Jasper? Who remembers? You remember? The St. Bernard? So instead of saying that they've gone over to the people's house, they're saying they went over to another animal's house, and the animal's Jasper. Chester and Tucker crept in, and Harry ushered the mouse over to a saucer placed in one corner of the sun porch. Cat food, exclaimed Tucker when he saw what was in the dish. That's not what I want. I'm sorry, Tucker, said Harry. I wish it was sirloin steak, but they put me on cat food the day after I saw you last. Try it. It's tuna fish. You'll like it. Tucker took a suspicious sniff at the tuna, then a less suspicious bite, and in a minute he was munching happily. Not bad, he said. Tastes sort of like the tuna fish salad sandwiches they make at the lunch counters back home. He took an appraising glance at Harry, and then said to Chester, The kitty here has put on weight. You would have too if you'd been eating the way I have, said Harry. Tucker drew himself up proudly. I, on the other hand, have lost weight. Did you notice what good shape I'm in, Harry? That comes from leading the outdoor life. See this muscle here? I got that from swimming. And this one here I got from climbing trees. And that muscle in your jaw you got from talking too much, said Harry. Why don't you use it to eat for a while? Excuse me. Tucker took one more look at his friend and shook his head sadly. Pity to see a vigorous alley cat go flabby. Then he resumed his gobbling. I'm glad the Hadleys are treating you so well, Harry, said Chester. Oh, they treat me beautifully, said the cat. They're crazy about me, even Mr. Hadley. The only trouble is they don't know my name is Harry, and they can't decide what to call me. I could think of a couple names, said Tucker, through a mouthful of tuna fish. Have you heard anything more about the meadow? Asked the cricket. No new plans yet, said Harry, but Ellen told her mother that the flood did do a lot of damage down where the brook flows out of the meadow, where we met you the first night. It almost washed away the bridge that the road goes over. Chester shook his head. That's bad. The human beings hate it worst of all when something interferes with their cars. I wish they liked meadows as much as they do roads. What's for dessert? Said Tucker, licking the last of the tuna fish off his whiskers. What is Tucker most interested in? Food. Nice to see that you still know what's important, said Harry. I know it's important to save the meadow, said Tucker, but to someone who's just spent 2 weeks in a stump and in a willow tree surrounded by raging floodwaters, dessert is also important. Harry sighed helplessly. Come on, he said, and led the mouse and the cricket out of the sun porch, through the living room and into the Hadleys' kitchen. The only sweet thing he could find in one bottom cupboard was a jar of preserves with its top screwed on loosely. Do y'all know what preserves are? Like jelly or jam? So for dessert, Tucker had 2 mouthfuls of strawberry jam. When Tucker was full and feeling much better, he took a long look around the kitchen. You know, this is the first time I've ever been in a human being's house, he said. I could do some very lovely scrounging here. Could we have a tour, Harry? Harry said he guessed it would be all right and took them both on an excursion through the Hadleys' home. First they crept down the cellar stairs, Chester Cricket hopping along behind the other 2, and Tucker liked the basement very much. There were boxes piled everywhere, most of them empty. Wood was stacked against the wall, Mrs. Hadley's freezer was purring in one corner, and in another there was a battered old suitcase lying open. Do you think the freezer was actually purring like a cat? What do you think that means? Purring? It's the sound the motor's making, the freezer motor. In it was a collection of the toys that Ellen had had when she was a little kid. Tucker pulled out a claw full of stuffing from a ripped teddy bear, examined it closely, and pronounced, excellent for nesting. After the cellar, the first and second floor were a disappointment. Too neat, said Tucker. When Harry offered him a Kleenex from a box in Mrs. Hadley's bedroom, he declined and told the cat that he didn't need to blow his nose any more. His hay fever had completely vanished when he had become an athlete. Do you remember when they first got to the countryside, how Tucker kept sneezing, and they said he was allergic to outside? The climax of the trip was the attic. Tucker's eyes sparkled at what he saw, a welter of everything, books, bottles, old boxes, all lying around haphazard and helter-skelter. Wow, he exclaimed with admiration, and I thought my house was a mess. He began to pick his way lovingly through the debris. Do you know what debris is? The garbage. This place is a rodent's paradise. I could spend the rest of my life here. What's this? He stopped before a piece of wood that had iron letters nailed to it. They spelled Hadley. What does that spell? Hadley. Chester Cricket jumped over. That's a sign the Hadleys used to have in their front yard before the post it was on got broken. Lots of families in Connecticut have them, so people will know who lives there. Maybe I could have one outside the drain pipe in the subway station, said Tucker, in beautiful gold letters, M-O-U-S-E. What's that spell? Mouse. He continued browsing happily among all the things that the Hadleys didn't need anymore but couldn't bear to throw away, the treasure of attics everywhere. Chester and Harry did some exploring too. Harry came across 2 old-fashioned pewter pots that he thought were very pretty and deserved a better fate then to be discarded and forgotten, and Chester found a box full of baby clothes. He guessed that they had once been worn by Ellen, or perhaps even her mother. They were so old that the colors had begun to fade and change. Do you all have a place in your house that you put things that you don't use anymore, your parents don't use anymore, but you just can't stand to throw them away? Yeah, I have some things like that in my garage and in my attic. It was a very happy time for the three of them. In fact, it was so happy that they forgot how long they'd been there. Suddenly, Harry Cat lifted his head. He'd been rummaging through Mr. Hadley's sports equipment, a tennis racket with loose strings, a broken golf club, things like that, and was about to suggest that Tucker Mouse, the great athlete, might find a use for some of them, but now he whispered urgently, "Shh!" A murmur of voices came from the floor below. Who could it be? "It's Ellen and her mother," said Harry. "They're back from lunch." He listened again. "They're in Mrs. Hadley's bedroom. Come on, I'll sneak you through the hall and downstairs." Very quietly, the animals tiptoed down the attic stairs. Harry peeked out. The hall was clear. They were just about to begin creeping down the banister of the staircase to the first floor when Mrs. Hadley said, "Oh dear, there it is!" "There's what?" said Ellen. The afternoon newspaper had been delivered while Ellen and her mother were out to lunch, and Mrs. Hadley was glancing over the front page. "It says here that the town council has decided to build apartment houses on the side of the old meadow." "Oh, no," said Ellen. She didn't know it, but out in the hall a cricket echoed her forlorn groan. What do you think forlorn means? How are they feeling right now? Really sad. That's what forlorn means, really sad. It says that the recent flooding has proved that the area is a hazard to the community. "Isn't there any other way they could stop the flooding?" said Ellen. "I don't know, dear," her mother answered. She went on reading. "Plans are being made to level the entire meadow and construct a conduit for the brook passing through it. Work is expected to begin later on this summer." The animals were shocked by the news. They stood motionless at the top of the staircase. "Now, try not to be too upset, dear," said Mrs. Hadley, her voice coming nearer the bedroom door. "I know how you feel, but a mouse!" Harry and Tucker plunged downstairs. Chester hopped after them 4 steps at a time, but Mrs. Hadley wasn't concerned with the cat or the cricket. In fact, she didn't even notice Chester. Although her attic was a mess and her cellar none too tidy either, she prided herself on keeping a clean house. And for her, mice spelled trouble. She ran to the hall closet, took out a broom, and chased Tucker, whacking at him as she went. Halfway downstairs, she caught him and gave him such a whop that he tumbled head over heels the rest of the way. But he landed right side up and kept on running. Through the living room, through the sun porch, and out the unlatched screen. Mrs. Hadley charged after him and just caught a glimpse of his tail as Tucker vanished into the privet hedge. "The very idea," said Mrs. Hadley. "A mouse sitting right out plain in the hall, just as bold as you please." At that very moment, although she didn't see it, a tiny black shape, Chester Cricket, jumped over Mrs. Hadley's foot and into the hedge. Ellen came out into the yard carrying Harry. He looked around, saw that Tucker had escaped, and heaved a sigh of relief. "And Ellen," Mrs. Hadley went on, "there's something very peculiar about that cat of yours. He was standing right next to the mouse, not doing a thing. Just as if they were the best of friends in the world." "He may be peculiar, but he's nice," said Ellen, and kissed Harry on the head. "Now, why wouldn't Harry do anything to hurt that mouse?" "Because they are best friends." In the Hadleys' front yard, the mouse, next to whom that peculiar cat had been standing, was limping toward the road. He stopped to massage one hind leg. "That lady sure packs a wallop," he said to the cricket, hopping along beside him. "Wow, one Connecticut housewife, and she's worse than a whole herd of commuters. At evening rush hour, too." So the commuters are the people in the subway station. And he's saying that one Connecticut housewife, Mrs. Hadley, is even harder on him than all the busy hustle and bustle people in the subway station. So that's the end of chapter 7. And the next is chapter 8, and it's called Bertha. Bertha, the name Bertha. So you can be thinking about what might be in that chapter. And remember, some things that you can do are talk about character or characters, setting. Do we have any new places in the story? Problem, any new problems? And have we had any resolutions yet? Do we have any problems that have been solved? Or do you want to make some predictions about how you think the problems in the story might be solved by the end of the book? So I'm going to add this to I need to say not again. I need to add this to the Google Classroom. You'll be able to get to it through the YouTube link that I'm going to share on there, just like last time. So I love and miss you guys, and I look forward to your comments. And I am really enjoying your journal entries on Google Classroom too. Some of you are sharing your journals with me like a Google Doc. And I gave you a new assignment this week that's Google Slides. And I can't wait to see how you guys work on that. So I love you, I miss you, and I will read to you soon.